with Mr. Alex Carioti. Did I pronounce it right? Or?
Yes,
yeah.
One of few.
One of you, yeah. Well, I know what it feels like when they're trying to pronounce my name, so it's all good. But man, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for coming through today. I know you must love your weekends.
Yeah. We work 6 days a week in our profession, obviously. Sunday's important.
Yeah. There's obviously a few things I want to catch up with you about. I've been obviously wanting to chat to you. The main reason was obviously, you know, some may know, some may not know. I got to come and do some content work with Jacinta for one of her fights, and in that I got to have a chat to yourself as well. And you know, obviously your fighters and your athletes might have a different opinion, but something that stood out to me was that really stood out to me that day was just your presence around your athletes. But it was also, I don't know, I felt like there was a sense of the way you were directive, the way you spoke to them. It was such a calm demeanor about it, and it really stood out to me, man. You know, I never really raised it with JJ and anyone else, but it always stood out to me, and it's something that I always told myself when this moment came. It's something I wanted to speak to you about, but which, you know, we'll get to. But talk a little bit about, I guess, your journey. You know, obviously, you know, you've competed, you compete, and also being a coach, but talk about your martial arts journey and how that led to where you are now as a coach and kind of running your own ship. Like, how did you kind of get into it, and what led you down that path?
Yeah, so I'll give you a brief summary. So I was obsessed with martial arts from a little kid. A bit closer, yeah.
So, yeah, there you go. Yeah,
so
perfect, bro.
I think if you look at a lot of us that ended up being coaches or running our own gyms, we were the big Bruce Lee, Van Damme kids. You know what I mean? They were the guys of our generation. Martial arts was romanticized and was given this kind of godly status before jiu-jitsu or UFC was a thing, right? So we kind of all grew up wanting to be in martial arts. So I started with Taekwondo when I was like 5 or whatever. I got my black belt in that, but I disliked... I probably did for 5 years, but I really kind of disliked that there was no contact. I spoke to my parents about it. Didn't make sense to me. When we did sparring, we had to throw punches and kicks in front of each other. I said that I thought that was stupid. So they pulled me out the day I got my black belt. I said I didn't want to do it anymore. And I actually fell into fencing, funnily enough, from the ages of 11 to about 21 for about 10 years. And I did fencing.
Damn.
Yeah. I did that extremely heavily.
What got you into that?
Best mate was doing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
it was for me. So I wanted to do boxing. I wasn't allowed to do boxing, but my parents said I could do fencing. I really disliked team sports heavily because I just had this bad run of being in teams where the kids, I said to my parents at that age at 10 that I felt like the kids weren't putting in the same effort I was, and that I didn't feel like that was fair that I should lose because they weren't trying hard enough. So I decided from that point it was individual sports for the rest of my life. Never going to do team sports again. So when I got to fencing, had a bit of immediate success and then just kind of ran with it to like a point where I just did that full time. I went to, like, I was on a scholarship for it at university, like a sports scholarship. Like I did like heavily did it. By the time I came out of that, I'd had like quite a bit of sporting experience, being like on the national team for probably about like 4 or 5 years at that point. So I'd got a really good idea of how to work as an athlete. So when I came across to boxing and kickboxing, I already felt like I had a really good head start on the other athletes, especially my understanding of like combat, distance, timing, and etc. So I had a really fast start with striking sports as well. It was more just learning how to conduct my body differently, but a lot of the concepts applied immediately, especially like the nerves I never had much trouble with because I'd competed at such a high level, like the highest level in my sport, that when I was going to like a local boxing show or jiu-jitsu comp, I just didn't feel the pressure. It felt really small comparatively. So I raced through very quickly in striking and like at the amateur at the start, did a lot of fights in back-to-back and had a lot of good success. But the goal was kind of MMA, but I just didn't want to grapple and I didn't like grappling. So I had that I'm going to be a striker thing in my mind. And then Liam from VT1, who I started with, he pushed me. He really encouraged me and got me to enjoy grappling a lot more. And then as I kind of pieced it together, I realized that the options here were quite limited for growth in terms of MMA. Like back in 2008, there weren't a lot of options for MMA fighters. There weren't a lot of shows. I don't even think it was mostly sanctioned. Sometimes you weren't even allowed to fight in a cage, etc. All the fights then were back in a ring. They weren't amateur, it was only pro. Like it was just all over the place. And even when you fought, it didn't go on any kind of record. Like Sherdog didn't know, they were the only people at the time, didn't know you were fighting. Like it was very unorganized. So I actually moved to Canada to train full time. And I stayed there for 2 years.
Whereabouts?
In Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went up to Montreal, which was the first idea was to try Toronto and Montreal and just to see where I'd like to fit. But I found in Montreal, when you went to TriStar, you weren't given any time because they had their pro team. And so I remember in the first couple of days there, I wanted to try stay back and watch the pro team train by just pretending to hit the heavy bag. And I was asked to leave the gym. So you're not allowed to be in the same room as the pros when they train. I thought, well, if there's that much difference between where I am and not even being able to be in the same room as them in the gym, it's probably going to take a while to get any attention. So I went back to Toronto in a much smaller team and got a lot of attention. And 3 of those guys from that team made the UFC anyway. So it was a very strong team. But training full-time there was like more eye-opening to understanding the kind of life of a fighter and the kind of journey and the progression, because it had actually just been sanctioned in Ontario the week I arrived. I had their first ever MMA event, which was the UFC GSP versus Shields. And so...
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I watched that and that was the start of my trip. But
it's crazy even just thinking about that fight and then your journey and then you were there. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah.
Definitely was. Because it's funny because the guys who are in the sport now think of GSP Shields as like a fight before their time, but really it wasn't that long ago. It's only like 10, 11 years ago, which for me doesn't seem long because I've been watching the sport for 20-something years, you know what I mean? But then after that, when I got to see more about kind of, let's say, the life of a fighter and the position they're in and the risks they take to try make it, I made the diversion to a coach instead of a fighter when I decided I probably wasn't willing to keep taking that risk, because I had a partner as well, and I thought, well, fuck, my honest idea was, how long am I going to drag her through chasing this if there's nothing material? For 2 years I hadn't been able to solidify a pro debut. It had fallen through twice when I was there. Once the event got cancelled, once the guy pulled out. It just seemed to back hurdles, and I was like,
they don't have the systems that they have now, right? Even in terms of just making coin, and different ways of being able to build the wealth to keep it sustainable. There's a much better structure now. It's probably only going to get better as the years go on, right? As comparison to when when you were trying to get into it. It's too stressful sometimes.
It was still a fringe sport. Remember, it had just been sanctioned when I got there, so there were no promotions because no one had ever run an MMA event in Ontario before. So these guys were trying to run promotions and having their first events ever. It was all over the place. And the problem was, when they ran a promotion, and let's say there were 12 slots on the card, everyone in Ontario was killing themselves to get on that card because there were no cards. So getting on the card was impossible. And when I finally got on and then the event fell through, it was kind of like, fuck me. So it was kind of lots of false starts. And I just thought, like, you know what I mean? If I was like a superstar and I thought, you know what, I'm definitely going to make it and I'm definitely going to make money in the UFC, I'll take the risk. But I didn't think I was a superstar. I thought I was a good fighter, but not like, you know what I mean? We should risk our whole lives backing me as a fighter. You know what I mean? That was just a judgment call I made.
Going back to fencing, I know you said that your friend was doing it, but like, I don't know, like, all I know is the most like surface of fencing, but what was it about that kept you in the, because you seem like a guy that you have to be passionate or have some sort of interest in something to be all in it, right? And the time period that you've spent your time doing that is a decent amount. There's got to be a bit of love for it. Talk a little bit about like being in it, like what is it like, what aspects of them that kind of draw you into it, but even for someone that doesn't do it or doesn't know too much about it, right? From a combat perspective, or even from a competitive perspective, what are some of the things and what are some of the ingredients involved in it?
So for 11-year-old me, at first glance, it was just sword fighting, and that was awesome. I thought the fact that you could do that safely was fucking cool. Yeah. And then after that, I just became like deeply obsessed with the technical nature of the sport.
Which is I wanted to get into.
Technical.
Because it looks like there's a massive technical aspect to it. Yeah,
unbelievable. And there's so much time put into perfection in that sport because you're working in such really small degrees of everything. Everything has to be done in an exact way. And I became obsessed with this idea of doing everything exactly a certain way. So my practice hours were through the roof. So I was trying to do 3.5 hours a day when I was in high school. So I tried to do about half an hour to 45 minutes at lunchtime at school. And then I would do 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the gym at night. And then I would try get home before 11, sleep, get up in the morning, go to school. So I like was putting in as much time as humanly possible. I had a whole like setup at home where I would just dive my like Saturdays and Sundays into it. I think people would be interested if they knew more about it. The problem is at first glance, it's kind of like jiu-jitsu. You look at it and you know it's technical, but you don't know enough about it to enjoy it. You don't really know what the fuck they're doing. That's like fencing. It looks for the most part like just sword fighting, but it's just so intricate. And I've always explained this to people. The less tools you have and the less playing area you play in, the more technical the sport becomes. So what I mean by that is when you have Muay Thai and you have 8 limbs, although it's technical, there's a lot of answers to one problem, where when you reduce it down to just hands, you have fewer answers, so your answers need to be far deeper. So boxing has a technical brilliance to it. Now, if you just fought with one hand and you just fought in a straight line, it would completely change the dynamics again. In a straight line, their understanding of distance and timing is unbelievable. And then what relates directly to that is understanding of footwork. Is so much more advanced than the other combat sports. You have no choice. If you only move forward and back, imagine how smart you'd need to be with how good you are at moving forward and back. So the more you reduce the weapons, the more detail you get into with those weapons. And I really enjoyed the immense detail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is so putting yourself in that, are you reading all those things while you're competing? Are you reading absolutely. Footwork? You're reading, distance, Because the reason I brought that up is because you were talking about the understanding of distance, and I said, well, a lot of it must have come from your experience in fencing, right? Absolutely. Which, like one thing that you really alluded to, which I understand, is that if you don't know much about it, you don't know what you're looking for, and then so the interest is not going to be there. But like you said, if you know what you're actually looking for and how to kind of appreciate what you're seeing, then it's different, right? You kind of dive into it. The coaching side of it, I mean, even that alone, man, making a decision on that, it's a pretty big decision, because in the grand scheme of things, you're going to now be responsible for people, right? And not only that, you're going to have to trust that whatever energy, whatever lessons, whatever is that you're teaching is going to have to, like, you're going to have to back it up. What gave you the courage to go down that path?
So I was coaching from 17. So while I was fencing, I was also coaching as income. And when I had early success, it encouraged me. I realized pretty early on in 2 ways. I realized I was better at making other people do things than I was at doing them myself in a way. And then a lot of my coaches told me and pushed me towards coaching because of my nature and the way I thought about things. Even the other athletes, like I ran into one guy a couple months ago. Me and him were rivals through our entire fencing career. We met in the final of pretty much every national tournament, you name it. We're on the same national team for years. He said to me the same thing, that he always thought that coaching was going to be where I went because of the way I approached things. How can I explain it? There's a certain, let's say, skill to being able to transfer a thought versus being able to demonstrate a thought. It's really easy for an athlete to demonstrate something and it's very hard for them to transfer it beyond the case of put your hand here and put your knee there, to actually like be able to adjust the thought to suit the understanding of the individual and to kind of track the way they're responding to the knowledge and then manipulate it to help them along from 0 to completion is just kind of like a skill that you get better with in time, but it's kind of like a have it or don't have it.
Don't have it.
Feature.
Yeah.
And you're seeing some people who get frustrated or confused when they're trying to get someone on that journey from 0 to completion of knowledge, and they don't know why the person can't do it. It's pretty much coaching is not going to be a good path for them.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I get quite intrigued if someone's not getting it, and I kind of think I wonder why their mind reads it this way and how I should present it to make their mind see it in a way that'll help them through it. And I think kind of like I view each student as like a little puzzle, because it's always that same thing that I give the same information to 10 students. 5 will do it one way, 3 will do it another way. The other 2 will just do it completely spastic. So I enjoy finding out how to get all 10 to that point. You know what I mean? I really enjoy the, like I said, solving that puzzle with students.
Yeah. But I think it's what you just said. It's solving puzzles, right? It's like I always say, like, I'm lucky when I have, like, say, professional athletes or guys more experience ahead of me, because my job's easy. Like the bar is set, but it's also like easy to follow, right? But then sitting and looking at things and saying, hey, we could do it this way, that way, there's got to be a bit of love and understanding for what you're doing, but also that trust, like we can do it this way, we can do it that way, not just the way that's been taught or the basic way, right? And some athletes, it's easier to be told what to do as opposed to sitting there and finding different intricacies on how you're trying to do, right? Not that they can't, but I get what you're alluding to as well, because for me, like, one of the easiest things for me is having people around me that are way ahead of me, and it's building blocks. Like, it's almost like you can follow and be like, hey, this is how you got to do it. But if it's on you to kind of customize things and be very, very have a bit of variation in how you do things, and trust that process is going to be as effective as what seems as the norm is different, right?
Absolutely. And it builds it takes time to build that confidence, and it takes a lot of trial and error, but it's a mindset that I've learned to develop over time, because it was kind of like you go through as an athlete and you learn things that work and don't work, and you take things from your coach that you use as an athlete and you disregard things that didn't work for you. And then coming back later and learning how things work for you don't for your athletes, and that things that you disregarded, like, for example, I hated triangles when I was a white belt, and then I had a student as a white belt who just triangled everyone, and switching my mind to understanding and learning and appreciating triangles. It's just like it's so hard to have to work inside a framework. And what happens is, if you've just worked with, say, like, one coach and they've always told you this is the way of doing things, and you get married to that, you're limited as a coach, and maybe not as an athlete. It might work perfectly for you and you might be phenomenal as an athlete, but you're very limited as a coach. And so if you can't challenge their ideas and challenge your own ideas and your own theories on things that have worked so well for you, or that you think work in general, is hard. Like, just before we started, Jacinta sent me a takedown that I've told her in the past not to do because of the inherent risk. And Mal Kuhn just hit it 3 times in his UFC fight 1 hour ago. Who am I to tell you it doesn't work? I'm just telling you, okay, these are the inherent risks. This is how I would do the takedown if I wanted to, and this is how it's going to go wrong. But I would never have the confidence to teach that to her. And then he's on the world's highest level and just doing it easily. So how can you have that framework of, you know what I mean? This is right and this is wrong.
How is that challenge though? Because obviously, like you said, you have a variety of athletes, right? The one thing I've come to, I've trained in kickboxing and boxing, but even just that alone, like, stylistically, so many people are different. Like, you know, you got people that got traditional styles and you got very awkward styles, but it works, right? Something that you alluded to was that as a coach, being able to be in tune with that and knowing that, hey, I got 10 different people trying to get them somewhere, like, you know, to a certain point, but each of them probably might go about it differently or have a different an approach to it, but still kind of in somewhat way have the same result. Is that something that you encourage? Is that something that's challenging as well? Because everyone's stylistically a bit different, and you know, some might, you know, go about, you know, whether it's a jab or whatever it is, doing things a bit different. How's that kind of challenge? Because like something that I've only kind of been on my journey very short, just even in just being in the gym, but just seeing being lucky enough to see different people and different professional athletes compete as well. The one thing I've come to really understand is everyone's different, but it works.
Yep.
It's not like one size fits all kind of thing.
So complex question. I learned about this distinctly in a fight when I was cornering one of my amateurs years ago. In round one, he was throwing this punch I'd never seen him throw, but it was this odd kind of looping right hook, and I'd never seen him throw it once in the gym. And he came back to me at the end of round one. I said, "That right hand you're throwing," and immediately before I got to finish, he was like, "Yeah, I know, it's weird, I'll stop throwing." And I was like, "No, the opposite. Whatever you're doing with that right hand, just keep doing it. It's working."
Because it looks comfortable, yeah.
But no, because he was hitting the dude with it. He was hitting the
yeah.
dude repeatedly with it. It was fucking working. I don't know how he just made it up on the spot and it was working. It looked retarded, but it was fucking hitting the dude. And he won. And then I kind of made a rule after that fight that I think what's more important is the results than the execution. So a knockout punch can be thrown 10 different ways and have the same result. So in effect, they're all correct. Right? If you score the basket, it's irrelevant how you threw the ball. The point is to get it in the basket. So once you score it, you were right. Irrelevant how you threw it. If the person is to take the person down, then it's irrelevant how you do it. If the person's on the ground, you took them down. You get your 2 points in jiu-jitsu, whatever it be. What there is varying degrees of risk and varying degrees of effort. So I can do risks that are takedowns that are far more risky than others, right? And I may get away with it 3 times out of 10 and not for 7. So I would probably put that in the pile of don't do, right? There are double legs where I can get away with it 8 times out of 10. Also look at energy. It's easy enough for me to lift my opponent, take them down, but I discourage my students from doing that because of the energy expenditure for the reward. If I can find an efficient, safer way that has a good probability of execution, that I'm leaning towards right. But the most risky, most high energy takedown sometime is required certain points in the match. If it's an even fight and we're in round 3, we're a round up each, and this takedown's going to pull me into the top position for the last 2 minutes of the fight, you do what it takes to get that person down, and it's right. Irrelevant to how incorrectly you execute it, it's absolutely right. And so I don't have any marriage to the idea of right or wrong. I have marriage to the idea of strategy in terms of expenditure, in terms of risk or probability of success.
What are some of the, I guess before we go into that one, I'll touch on what we began with. When I came over to do some filming for Jacinta's, for one of her last fights, I told you how one of the things that stood up was just your demeanor when you were talking to them. Everyone's different, everyone has different approaches, but it really stood out to me because it seemed like there was so much detail, but it's just the way you went about it. Like, where does that come from? I'm not. It's not to say that every coach goes on yelling. Everyone's different, right? Some are a bit more vocal, but there was a sense of very calmness and a very calm presence about you, which I really liked. I really appreciated being able to see it, firsthand. Where does that kind of come from? Because, it's not to say that, on that day that your athletes were, kind of rolling wrong or going about doing things incorrectly. But whatever it was, whatever opportunity you had to be vocal during that session, there was, like I said, there was a calming presence. But where does your style of teaching come from? Where does that style come from?
I think it generates from 2 main points. The first being that usually most of what I'm saying is something I've thought deeply about for some amount of time. So by the time I execute it, it's typically like okay, let's stop and think about it for a moment. It's very important for me to grab such a large, intricate thing I've thought about for so long, compile it and present it in the most understandable way. And your tone and demeanor is so essential in your delivery. So if I can't get you on board and get you to completely focus to my voice and bring you on that journey of thought, then getting you from A to B is hard. So I'm very against telling people the answer. I'm very much about bringing them through the thought process to get to the answer themselves. So what I try to do is stop and explain to them the scenario, explain to them my thinking behind the situation, getting them to a point where they understand why it was wrong before I've even completed the sentence. And that involves like a structured way of presenting an idea. So as soon as you start picking up your voice or executing it incorrectly, the kind of like emotions involved detract from the point you're making. You should be able to make it quite clearly and concisely as long as you structure and deliver it well. And when you do that, what you do is rather than teach them the sport, you teach them how to think. And so when they start thinking that way internally, they'll start looking much deeper into their own martial arts rather than feeding them the answer, rather than calling underhook from here. Explain to them the idea that the reason we take the underhook from there is just, so if I explain to them the idea of not wanting to be flat on your back from half guard and explain to them turning up on your side, they immediately understand the function of the underhook. And then once they understand that, they'll immediately understand when they're on half guard why that underhook's necessary when they want to turn on their side. So they'll now take that concept and they'll spread it out over their whole half guard or jiu-jitsu rather than me calling underhook from there. Right? So you've got to bring them through the thought process, not to the conclusion. So teach them how to think. It's that fish for a day idea. Yeah. So rather than giving fish, you want to teach them how to fish.
So that, so they got a better understanding. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Where does, what are some of the, I guess, in terms of just the environment that you've built for your athletes, you know, something that for those that probably that didn't get to kind of watch my interview with you during that whole content, one thing that you really said was creating an environment where, you know, whatever kind of day or week the athletes are having, they don't have to feel the pressure that they got to come here and kind of, you know, be all in. Sometimes just kind of have a place to come and turn up and train and, you know, and be able to have a place where you can kind of deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. And that's something that really stood out to me in that conversation I had with you as well. Talk a little bit about some of your principles that you try to put onto your athletes and even just in the gym in terms of just the environment and how everyone interacts with each other, competes with each other. What are some of your most, I guess, most kind of valuable principles that you try to implement to, you know, for your athletes?
I think you've got to understand what your gym is and what your gym is for other people. So although we all would like to believe it, we're not running a gym for high-level athletes. There's very few of them on the mats. What it is for most people, it's something it does for them physically, mentally, and emotionally, and how you service that need for them. What I'm selling is exercise primarily, and at first glance, I'm selling exercise. But what I'm really selling is learning martial arts, but really what it's doing for the person's emotional state after work, confidence for as they lose weight, friendships where they've maybe found since they left uni or whatever and they work full time and they don't see their friends as much, they're falling out of friend circles and that, how they're using that to wind down from whatever is stressed them out from their day and they have that hour and a half of mindlessness on the mats. That just comes down to environment. It's got everything to do with culture, and culture isn't something that happens by accident. It's something that's very much, and maybe it's not planned in the exact way that I'm going to have this exact culture, but how you lead it is so important in creating that culture.
Starts
and what you
at the top.
Allow and disallow. Like I don't know if I told you, like I'm very quick to kick people out that are not in line with the culture or do things that, like one guy just recently replied a little aggressively to our receptionist about his account. So I just canceled it, sent an email back saying, don't worry about it. You're not in the gym anymore anyway. For me, that's goes so against our culture. I can't imagine someone trying to be aggressive by email to our receptionist. That's just not happening. Yeah. And we learned that the hard way by having individuals who sapped from our culture for ages. And over the time, I've kind of learned to just see them in advance. But like they're not coming to you to be a world champion. They're not coming to you to be a professional athlete. They're not. So when you can separate, when I work with my competitive athletes and when I work with my general population, it's really important. And in fact, because the athletes like Jacinta, who train about 5 hours a day with me, she actually appreciates sometimes having that like low-key, more comfortable environment to do jiu-jitsu with at 8 o'clock at night, with people that are fun and there to enjoy themselves and have a good conversation, because staying focused and on for 5 hours a day, it's difficult.
It's hard, man.
It's difficult. That works better to keep an environment for your athletes that they're going to enjoy coming to.
I'd say that it's a humbling moment too, right? Because in all of I didn't mean to cut you off, by the way, but in all of just, even with Jacinta, which we'll get to her and you know, just all that dynamic, but like, you know, kind of competing and pushing towards that world stage, sometimes, you know, it's easy, like you said, to be on all the time or know when to switch off, but also to kind of remember why you love doing something. And I think being with general population, it'll always remind you the love you have for what you're doing, and that should always be the forefront of anything. Is like, don't forget how much you love it. Don't let it become like a chore or a job. You know, it's like, look at, when you see the happiness in everyone else's faces, it reminds you why you love what you're doing. You know, it's kind of what, you know, I feel like what you would feel like, you know.
And this is where fight teams have fallen apart in the past. So what happens is you have a group of people who are hungry because they're not eating, they're cutting weight, they're competing, they're nervous, they're touchy. You're asking them to be selfish for camp, so they're not creating a good team environment. They're winning their fights, they're not showing up for their team, and it's creating a very always on environment, which actually ends up not working so well. You pointed it out really well there. It's good to integrate the athletes with your casuals as long as they're safe and they work well. That's the downside to mixing athletes sometimes. Like, we'll have a visitor who knows who Jacinta is, and he'll come in and he'll just go fucking turbo on her. So when that started happening at the very start, we start cancelling that now. And so they're not allowed to work with her until I've had a good scope of who they are.
Damn.
Yeah. So she's a 58 kilo girl. And it's so dangerous, but everyone wants to beat Jacinta.
Yeah.
So we had that a few times. And now she has a group she'll work so well with casual is I feels like it's almost a rude word, but they do it casually. They don't do it professionally.
No, it's not meant to it's not meant to derogatory way. Obviously.
So a good group of that casual environment, which really they are your gym. They pay your bills. They are the reason why I have a gym. Like Jacinta isn't the reason why I have a gym. She's the reason why I personally have a gym, but it's not the thing that pays the bills.
Of course.
So I can't be stupid enough to make it all about her.
Of course. I mean, it's something that I guess, you know, I personally have learned in my life, is that, like, you know, I've had like strength and conditioning coaches, and I've had like, you know, all various types of people that have inputs in what I do, and sometimes, look, ultimately you got to keep the lights on, and, you know, ultimately, you know, you want to make sure you're looking after your coaches and, you know, your team, whatever you're doing. But something that you said to me about your memberships, and, you know, just that scenario about, you know, the receptionist and this one, you know, ex-member and etc. Like, I think when it gets to that level where, you know, an athlete is dependent on you, like someone like Jacinta, who, you know, some people, and I guess even some gyms, it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of this false perception that, like, some, you know, like when you're an athlete, or even when you're like competing, you know, there's a sense of vulnerability in you, right? And your love and trust for the people. Like, even for me, you know, I recently like turned pro, and even the people around me, like, I got to make sure that, you know, I got a kid, you know what I mean? I need to know that they really give a fuck about me. Like, you know, I need them to like care about my life, not, you know, anything else, you know, more than. And I think sometimes there's a false perception with certain people and certain gyms sometimes as well, where the transaction of money, sometimes you realize that it's easy when you're paying someone or whatever it is. you don't realize there's a lot more that a coach's got to give you than just that, and I think that is hard to find sometimes, and I think that's what I think a lot of people need to really take into consideration, is that yes, paying is one thing, but is this person genuinely going to care about you, like your health? Like they got to know what's best for you sometimes when you don't know what's best for you, in certain situations. And I think something that you touched on, which I think talks a lot about your character, is that, yes, you got to keep the lights on and you got to keep the gym running, but not to the extent of like a bad culture or even like you're saying, how you got your casuals and then you got your athletes, but treating them both in a similar scenario. The love you have for them and the energy you put for them is the same. It's just the what you give an athlete is different because of this, the environment and their scenarios of what they're competing for. But the people that are rocking up to use the mats and to train, you realize that they're in it for their reason, right? It's something that I had a guest on last week, Andrew DiCarlo, promoter from Brisbane, and he was like to me, when we're talking about titles and stuff, and it's something he said to me, and I was so happy to hear him say that. It was like, sometimes he goes, a state title is someone's world title. You don't know what it means to that person, and sometimes we forget that. We forget that they're coming to the gym, someone who rocks up the gym 5 times a week, who's just there to do the classes or whatever. You have no idea what it means to them to come and train and go home, and by the end of the week, they probably feel like champions, right, in whatever they're doing. So I think that alone is, you realize not everyone has your best interest, just because you there's a genuine transaction doesn't mean they're going to give you the service that, that you may really require. And I think there's a lot more that you need from your team and your coaches than just, hey, I'm going to come here because I heard you can do this, or I heard you're a good strength and conditioning coach, or whatever it is, I think it's, as athletes, you have those days, right? Like you have those days where things aren't going well, whatever. And, and I know I personally and other people personally have experiences where it's like, it's like they just kind of brush it off, or like, you missed a class, or what I mean? It's like kind of having a deeper understanding of what that wave's like and what they're going through in their personal life and things like that. And, it's taking all that in board too, right? As a coach, is that it's not just, hey, here we are, we're fighting and, you're doing MMA, I'm the coach. But it's like kind of almost buying into a deeper layer of who they are as well, understanding that there's all these other things in their environment that could impact their journey, and it being in kind of tune in with that, with that. Yeah. Perfect. Talk a little bit about, that challenge as a coach. Yeah.
I keep seeming to break every answer.
Yeah, it's all right. Break it down, brother. I'll break it down.
I feel like there's two kind of answers there. So there's the way I look at coaching is I try to return the amount of effort that I get from the student, irrelevant of pay or standpoint or rank or objectives or goals or whatever. So if I have a student who doesn't plan to compete but shows up every day and puts in a lot of effort, they will get a lot of effort from me, no question. And if I can directly relate what you put into what you receive from me, it's always going to be a genuine transfer. At the end of the day, Jacinta and the next guy are all both paying the same rate. So in that regards, they're all even. What they're never going to be even in is what they commit to me or to the team.
I like that.
Right? Yep. Especially there's some individuals, we got one guy in particular, doesn't compete, but just wants to just help everyone else and just wants to be on the team and be part of it and help. And so he's going to get a lot from me, obviously, right? In return. The second part, where I feel like this is, I'd say a pitfall or a danger, is don't coach to people's emotional needs. So what you can do as a coach, which gets you in a lot of trouble, is get caught too bad into people's stories about my hard time at work and my breakup, and I don't have money to afford the gym right now. And when you start relating what you're going to put in relation to their emotional needs, you're going to start getting yourself in a lot of trouble, because people are emotional beings by nature. They don't mean to lie, but they can lie. So the guy who doesn't have enough money and wants a membership always gets the answer no, because he needs to go organize his life better to be able to afford $49 a week. He shouldn't be at a gym. He should go get a job. the guy who always comes to me and's always got the problems. It's like the one I realized it when we first started was my son's always picked on. And then as soon as he got into the kids class was picking on every kid all the time. And so I realized stop catering to this story and this, so when everyone comes, they give you this kind of, they bring you along this kind of like imaginary journey with them, and you learn about all their problems in life and you get invested in them personally. I really want to help this person. Extract yourself from that. Help people based on, like I said, their commitment and their actions rather than their story. That's going to get you in trouble a lot. Some people just go from location to location selling out that story for that sympathy and that emotional requirement they need from all their coaches, because they need your attention. They need you to tell them they're doing well and all that. And then when they got that, they kind of don't need you anymore. So once they've taken from you, they'll either move on or they become so attached to this constant emotional need from you, you realize that that's actually the reason why they're there. It has nothing to do with the sport. And you see this when people move suburbs and then they never pick up the sport again. That had nothing to do with they never liked jiu-jitsu. They just loved me telling them that they were doing well. And when they can't find that anywhere else, they're not interested in it. So don't feel the need to run around as a coach or gym owner to have to help people all the time in that strict sense. You will help people all the time anyway, but not in that sense of, I need help, can I have it? Oh yeah, well, you seem like having trouble. Maybe the trouble is self-generated, and maybe by helping them, you're not encouraging them to stop doing what it is that's getting them in
just
trouble
adding to it. Yeah,
so don't get caught into people's stories. I've been down that path way too far with people. There was an example where a guy came in and needed help with his anger problems. So we'd sit after class and we'd talk, and jiu-jitsu was helping him. And then he broke my wife's arm in half.
What?
Completely snapped her humerus in half.
What?
So, yeah. The day before we went away for me to propose, he snapped it completely.
What?
Clean broke, plate, 10 screws, never trained again. And then I realized he is his own problem. Makes sense? He just does things as it suits him, and he just wanted me to give him attention.
Yeah.
So he was obviously eradicated from the gym. But I just learned as I go that it's not that people can't be trusted. They absolutely can. It's that you shouldn't trust that person's story. Can I have money? I have no food, where the guy's spending on who knows what. Particularly was I always want the free pads and the free training, and then the Insta story of them going out. You're always like, oh, you fucker. There was one guy in particular who I remember he told me he couldn't buy shin pads. I gave him a pair, and his friend was like, you do realize you just spent $300 on the weekend on drugs. That's why I can't afford the shin pads. And just all these kind of key moments that happened to me over the years made me realize that people aren't always like deceptive on purpose. It's just people's nature.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So don't give to people based on that emotional content. Don't get caught into that, or you'll feel very betrayed by a lot of people. You feel very let down, and it'll actually kill your love for coaching very quickly.
It's something you just said there. Something that I said to my cousin a few weeks ago was we were talking about a situation, and I said to him, I've come to understand sometimes all that is their own unhappiness, and sometimes it's easy to take it personally, but that's just what they're projecting out in the world. You just happen to be the person that's directly being affected by it, always being affected by it. But if you didn't have a face or a name, you'd be anyone that's there. You know what I mean? And sometimes you got to understand that it's easy to take it personal, but it's like it's way deeper than that. It's like you said, it's whatever they're going through, and that's how become
your responsibility.
Your responsibility.
Can't take on all your students' problems.
Yeah,
it's not your responsibility, and you rob them of the power to resolve it themselves anyway by trying to help them all the time with it. Again, mistakes you make along the path.
That's crazy. Talking about Jacinta and yourself, man, I really, and I mean this when I say this, I love the relationship and the bond that you guys have as coach and fighter, and I'm sure it's deeper than that, but I got to see it firsthand. I've even I've seen it, just watching her fight and you cornering her and etc. Those type of relationships, or the development of those relationships, they don't happen overnight, and they happen with a lot of kind of transparency from both people and learning things, and like goes back to a bit of those questions about understanding your athletes at different layers, right? Not just at face value, but you kind of know what you're getting from someone, right? So that, going back to what you were saying, you'll know how to invest time in certain people because you can feel it, that investment is worth it because of what they're giving you, and that's what I get from your relationship with her, and just how she's kind of built her journey to this point. What's that relationship like, and it being developed over the years? But man, just funny as it sounds, sometimes it just seems like it's as simple as you got a PlayStation remote and she does, like she's so in tune, like even just being in the gym with you, she's so in tune to your instructions. Like she just downloads it so well. And it's like one of my old coaches used to tell me when I had, like, I think it was my second amateur kickboxing fight, he's like, just listen to my voice. And he goes, he used to tell me it's like PlayStation. When I press X, you press X. And I just literally, I remember that fight and I just did whatever he told me to do. Like, it goes back to what you're talking about, being a coach and finding different intricacies, and being a fighter is easy because you just download whatever they're telling you. That's how it seemed to me. He would be like, jab, cry, and I'll just throw it. I wouldn't even think about it sometimes. I just throw it because I trust him, and that trust, I see that in her, in terms of what she has for you, and vice versa. Just the trust that you have for her, but just the way she downloads what you're saying. I managed to kind of watch from a distance that day. Talk about that relationship, but even just her being involved as a fighter, because man, she's fucking tearing it. She's tearing it up. And, the world is her oyster at the moment. And there's all these hurdles. And, even when she fought in the No Limit kind boxing, she fought a very, very tough opponent. And I hope people know that, like, who had a much more experience in that sense. Yeah. And she fucking flying colors, man, she just seems to be married to this idea and in her vision and her journey, and she just seems married to it, and that's what I get from her when I watch her, is that she's so sure of herself, which is amazing. And that's not in such a overconfident, cocky way, but she's so sure of her ability and man, like, in my eyes, she's not far from the top echelon in terms of like being able to be in the UFC or one of those premier organizations, because she's fucking knocking on the door big time, bro. Like, and it's so good to see, because I've had a podcast with her multiple times, and those stages were different stages in her fighting career too, all the way up to when I did the content most recently, and then even watching her, she's been to Japan as well, and the way she carries herself, like, it ain't fucking easy, man. It ain't easy. And she just, I love the confidence, and it's not even confidence in such a way that she markets herself, or the way she talks, or even like with none of her stuff on her, but it's her demeanor. Like, that's
very authentic.
Yeah, very authentic. But just watching her demeanor, the way she carries herself, you can tell she's oozing with confidence without having to kind of, like, come on, and talk about it and put that confidence out in the way she speaks, or like, I'm gonna, you know what I mean? She's just, even in her calm demeanor and the way she carries herself, you can tell in her eyes she's so sure of herself. So talk about your relationship, but just her, as how she's evolved and just where she's at, because like I said, I think she's knocking on the door at the right time, and it's a matter of time. Yeah, very close to it. Yeah.
I think the easiest way to answer it, if you're going to start from current before you wind back to understand it, is that she is an exceptional athlete and individual. Your role as a coach, unlike with other athletes with her, is she is a flame that needs to be fed. She needs to be nurtured and encouraged. She doesn't need to be directed in the same way that athletes do. So Jacinta has champion in her. She just needs to be supported, and she will. I like that. She will do all those other things that you spend so much time with athletes, trying to get them to training, trying to get them to watch fight tape, trying to get them, like, I'm always on my fighters about trying to get them to watch more fight tape all the time. It's the downloading info while their bodies can rest. You don't have to tell Jacinta. She's obsessed with the sport. She's watching it. If it's on, she's watching it before I am. So you have to coach Jacinta differently to how you coach almost all your other athletes. That being said, I think I kind of think of trust being built with a coach really works on being right enough times that they start to trust what you're saying, like almost blindly. It's kind of like if you told people you could read the future and 50% of the time you were right, you probably wouldn't have that same level of trust. You've got to be right a lot. And you know what's the funniest thing about that? Sometimes you can be wrong and still right, in the sense that I can be wrong about how something might be the right answer because Jacinta's so good she can make it work. And then she'll throw it back on me saying, that was a great idea, Alex. I'm like, no, it wasn't. You're just exceptional. Yeah. You know what I mean? And she does, she underestimates how much that plays into it, where there's a fight in particular in her second pro fight against Lisa. We went up a weight because technically I felt she was superior to Lisa, but Lisa missed the weight by over a kilo. So by the time Lisa and her came in, the weight difference was so huge. And Jacinta dropped the first round, and then it hit me that, like, holy fuck, this may have been a really fucking bad idea. We changed the game plan. I talked to her and I said, well, this is what we're going to do now. Throw all the training in the bin. This is what we're going to do now. But Jacinta can go do it. That's why. So she brought it around and she was like, great idea to choose a Lisa fight. I was like, was it? Maybe it wasn't at all. But because I have you, it was. With the next athlete, wouldn't have pulled that through. The next athlete, she's too big. I'm down around. I can't do this. Would have been the journey, but not Jacinta. So
because you still got to take that and go out and do it. And you got to make sure you have someone that can go do that. Like,
and you can be completely right about everything as a coach and not have the athlete
implement it. Fucking earth. You're right.
Correct. So I'm not willing to take so much credit for it. You have to throw the credit absolutely always back on the athlete who's out there fucking doing it, not me who's saying it in the fucking stool. That's very easy to do. Where you build the tightness in the relationship, though, is me and Jacinta, before we started working, we're actually at the point where we were both pretty much giving up on it, me as a coach and her as an athlete.
Fuck.
Yeah, she was looking at calling it and I was looking at calling it a bit as a coach. I just was completely disillusioned with the whole process and the whole idea of felt like zero reward for all the effort. She felt the same. She'd just come up for loss. We ran into each other only because her coach had just retired. And we'd always wanted to work together, but the heart wasn't there with her anymore when we started. I could see that she was mostly just frustrated and complaining about everything, and that's always the sign of on the way out. Thank God lockdown happened and the fight got called off, and then we met almost every day during lockdown and trained, and what I had to do was build her passion back in the sport. But what we both needed in each other was someone who was equally as driven or obsessed. I couldn't find anyone who gave a shit about it as much as I did, who was willing to put in as much as I was. That at 11:30 at night, if I would call my athlete about, I just saw this takedown on a fight I want to discuss, they'd be out and they wouldn't want to talk about it or whatever. There was like, I needed that level of like, Jacinta will walk outside of the party and we'll talk about double legs for 20 minutes.
That's fucking mad.
Because it's happened, not because I'm making it up kind of thing. And we just both needed that person to make it worth it for us.
For sure.
She had done, I didn't realize how much of her own training was self-guided and how much she just pushes herself in terms of her work ethic and commitment. Then I try to kind of bring her on and say, okay, you do this much. How about we do this much if we do it together? So what happens is she trains her 3 hours a day, but we meet for 2 hours a day and we do film study and technique study together. So we watch content together because now I have a partner to watch and analyze and she has a partner. So we've bumped it up to 5 hours a day now, and we're doing more and more and more escalating commitment as her career progresses. And like I said, I need someone to feed off with that energy, and she does too. Otherwise, what it becomes almost like a disease for you in terms of my social abilities go down, my ability to interact or to be calm or have less anxiety in life. It becomes better when I can get more out of my work. So because I'm so kind of ultra focused in my work, I often will be in a social situation but not be there mentally. Like if I'm thinking about an idea on, say, a submission, I'd rather sit and think about that, and I won't engage with the people. So having her to be able to message and say, what do you think about this, keeps that kind of part of me organized. So
it's almost like you're writing your thoughts down like a journal, like by having someone to share that with, right? Yeah.
Correct. So it was affecting my life in a very negative way, where I would sit up at nights to whatever AM in the morning doing a lot of study on gyms and coaches and athletes. And you feel like you're pulling yourself away more into your own little hole, away from society and people. And that becomes a negative thing, where now it's a positive thing. The more study I'm doing, the more time I'm putting into it, the better I'm being rewarded. But before, it was just kind of destroying my life a little bit. So it's hard when you have that obsession with something to live with that alone. It's not a lot of people relate to it or understand it in that sense, but it's kind of what it's going to take if you want to be decently good at something. So the more people you surround yourself with that understand you in that way, the more like accepted you are. When Jacinta has this problem as well, it happens when you're young and you want to do something in your life and your friends want to go out, and you're mostly like ostracized a little bit because of your desires, and it makes you question your own like choices about commitment and stuff. And so that can discourage you from wanting to be. But if you surround yourself with highly motivated people, they'll understand, and they're putting in the extra hours in their work and their jobs and stuff, and it encourages you to do those things rather than discourages you. So we were both in a situation where we felt like we were isolating ourselves with this obsession, and then having another person to obsess with helps a lot.
100%.
In a healthy way.
No, 100%. Because it can sometimes get a bit... you kind of disconnect yourself, right? Completely. 100%. I agree. And I think it's just good to like, I know for a fact, like I know that perspective of having someone, like, even just outside of just even my coaches, or even just people that I train with, like probably my brother being the only person who's a big fan of just combat sports in general, but when we watch fights or something, I'll always message him or whatever it is. But then, having that one person, like obviously I mentioned, I train with Rick, like he's that guy for me. Like, I can always message him or whatever it is, and I could get a response back. Otherwise, you're left with this thought on yourself and you're on your own.
Life. Fighting all the fucking time. What do you think? It doesn't do well for a relationship. All I'm ever talking about is fighting in the gym all the fucking time. It's not social. They can't wind down on a Sunday, and she can't just enjoy it time with me because I'm so fucking locked on all the time. So now when I get to Sunday, I can just have a better idea of just detaching myself, because I do it so much in those 6 days. Gives me my fill a bit. Because that's the flip side, right? It's knowing when to kind of switch on and switch off, right? Because we always want to be on. I want to be switched on all the time, and that's part of the problem, and that's what happens with the kind of deterioration of like myself and the fatigue, where you put, like this week I would have done fucking, just to give you an idea, you probably can't see this, but this is my calendar this week, my workouts. That's from 8 a.m. till
all 8:30. The way down.
So it's by the time you've done that work week, you're so used to being on all the time that you're lying in bed, you're being on, you're waking up, you're being on, because you work so much, you're always on. So unless I assign that time on that Sunday to tell myself to be off, I won't be, because I want to be on all the time.
And it's hard as well, right? It's like training yourself to do anything, right? Your body's used to it, right? So it's like, how do I switch off? Because this is all that I'm kind of used to as well, right?
I don't know when you say used to. So being on gives me a certain release of whatever chemical it is that makes me feel good. So I want to be on all the time because I like the feeling it gives me. Same with a drug addict who always wants drugs. Working gives me that feeling.
That reward system.
I always want to work. And when I'm sitting around in, say, like a social setting and a couple hours gone and I haven't had that release, I want to go do some work. So I'll watch some video, I'll talk about some fighting, and I'll get that release. So it's literally like an addiction in that sense.
And you don't know sometimes as well, just like I always tell people, like there's the mental aspect, right? Like you don't have to always physically be doing something to exert yourself or to kind of have that weight on your shoulders, right? Sometimes mentally you don't realize how much weight you have on your shoulders by the end of the week, and then you realize like it's just like anything, right? It's like physically doing something or whatever it is, right? There's that mental aspect that you don't realize, that if you don't know how to kind of find the right balance, it can weigh you down. And it's just like anything else that weighs you down, except it's not a physical, it feels physical, but it's
becomes physical, right?
becomes physical. Correct. Yeah. So, you know, it's very important in that sense as well. But man, we could go on and on, but man, like I said, man, I really appreciate you coming around and having a chat. It's something that I've been wanting to do, and I'm glad we kind of make it happen. And like I said, I'm really excited, just, you know, from a coaching perspective, and you know, with obviously with Jacinta and her future. I honestly think you guys are a great duo, man. And I think there's a big future for you guys, and I think it's treading along perfectly. And just even your philosophies and how you spoke, like I said, from the moment that I saw you speak to your athletes and the way you spoke to them, I knew that we needed to have a chat because, you know, I don't know every coach in the world, but I've been long enough to know variety. You know what I mean? To put it into perspective. So I've been around enough coaches to know how everyone's kind of techniques and how they teach, and yours stood out because of certain things that, you know, certain approaches and the way you delivered it. And, you know, it's something that stood out to me. But, man, I wish you nothing but the best. I wish you, you know, all the blessings when it comes to the gym and, you know, and that aspect of it. And I don't see you getting over this game anytime soon, bro. I think, given our chats, I think, you know, if anything, you'll always you'll find the next door and find a way to keep evolving as a coach as well. You know, and I think, you know, there's definitely plenty more chats between us as the time goes on as well. Yeah, 100%. As you progress, for sure. And yeah, man, I wish you and the team nothing but the best. And you know, I'm sure the door's gonna come knocking, man, for the big leagues. You know, the big leagues are, you know, already happening, but you know, we're talking about the top echelon. I don't see it not happening, man. And I can't wait for that moment to come, and I know that when it does, it'll be well deserved, man. And I just want to thank you very much, man. Appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to our next chat, brother.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.